Shalom Aleichem, howdy howdy. Pesach David here. I just want to share a little Dvar Torah, words of Torah that are ancient and brand new. I want to talk a little bit about the state of the world, coronavirus, and Moses and his father-in-law Yitro. The Torah portion this week is called Parshat Yitro, and it's really one of my favorite ones. Why is it one of my favorite ones? I think it's my favorite one because people change their stories in this Torah portion. Moses honors his father-in-law's wisdom and changes the way that he governs the nation of Israel. And Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, who is like the high priest of idol worship, he recognizes that there's one divine force in everything. And these are two big famous public figures who had sort of, they had reputations and egos. Well, I don't know if they had egos, but they, had certainly made their opinions known on how to do things, and they publicly changed. And it just seems so rare these days on these Facebook and social media threads. Look at all the debates that happen and all the information that gets shared. Facts, information, stories, people's personal stories. And how often have you ever seen anybody on these threads be like, oh, that's a good point. I didn't think about it that way. Thanks for sharing and teaching. I'm going to change my story. Very rarely. In the Jewish wisdom tradition, we have a book called the Talmud, the Gemara, which is one of our hardcore texts where all Jewish law sort of blossoms out from. And it's filled with opinions that get postulated, that get posed, and they get knocked out for the sake of a greater good and a greater truth. And I want to give us a wish and a blessing that we get better at that art of moving our ideas, of evolving our thoughts, and owning and admitting when narratives that we've been holding and been flag bearing turn out to be false. Clearly false. Sometimes what happens, I think, is we identify our ego and ourselves and our meaning to those narratives and to those stories, and then we're like, if that story goes, it's like I go. But it's not true. We're so much deeper than these stories that we hold, even though they are important and significant and have sometimes life or death ramifications. Some of the stories that people are holding on to have very significant ramifications. Some people say that for the sake of peace, we need to sort of just let there be a wholeness. Peace in Hebrew, shalom means shlemut. It means it can also mean a wholeness, integration. And there is a flavor of peace that integrates diverse ways of being and thinking, and that is beautiful. There are many nations and many different ways to be, yes. And at the same time, there are some ideologies that are not to just be integrated and say, oh, well, we're just different. I guess if you want to be a neo-Nazi white supremacist with murderous intentions, for the sake of peace, I'm just going to sort of accept your deadly opinion. We also have a tradition to stand against things that are wrong and incorrect and dangerous. And so it's dangerous to sort of, in the name of peace, incorporate ideologies that are deadly. Sorry. So there's different ways to peace. There's different flavors of peace. Every kindergartner gets taught the importance of speaking truth and the dangers of false narratives, how they can snowball, and how you have to make up another story to cover that story. I've just been seeing so many snowballing false narratives, and they're dangerous. They can lead to people getting sick. I know people who still today, it's February 2021, who still think that there is not a new virus that's killing an inordinate number of people. Even though they have friends and family members who have given them direct information, there is inordinate death happening, they still think it's just the flu, because that's a story they've clung to. They're dangerous. False narratives can snowball into the capital of the United States getting stormed by neo-Nazis. Okay, I know people, speaking of storms, I know people who've been telling me for a year or two now about some big storm that was going to come on Inauguration Day. It never came. And what do? Oftentimes they just double down, just make up another story. Let's break the cycle of false narratives for the sake of truth. It takes humility, it takes bravery, but it's for the greater good. I'd like to see some more of that. In this week's Torah portion, what I love so much is that right after these two big men, are able to humble themselves and learn from one another publicly, to change their stories and change their behavior, what does it catalyze in the world? The Torah. The Torah drops down. That's the very next thing that happens. After this fixing of the men happens, where they learn from each other, listen to each other, the very next thing that happens is we get the Torah in the wilderness. It's the very next thing. So I like to think they're connected. It says that when we got the Torah, that we stood as one people, one nation, with one heart, standing with the truth. And that's my wish for us, is that we can do that as a bigger community even. Like, let's stand with the truth, especially when it's so obvious and put in front of us. You know, there's always crumbs, little details and crumbs and mistakes in any project. There's going to be crumbs and things that are off. There's going to be opportunists that are trying to seize the situation. And sometimes what people do is they grab a little crumb and they put it right up to their eyeball so that all that they see is that crumb. And they call the crumb a sandwich when it's not. It's just a crumb. Okay, so let's see things for what they are. Let's not make crumbs into sandwiches. And let's be brave enough. Let's borrow some courage and humility from Moses and Yitro. And be open to changing our stories. I'd like to see some more of that for the sake of truth, for the sake of health. Shabbat Shalom. I hope, talk about it yourselves. Tell me what you think.